This is the Motivated Business Show, hosted by me, Mark Terrell, the author of Motivated, the Reluctant Leader's Guide to Building a Business that Sets You Free. In my book, I share the 7-step process to get the measure of your business. M.E.A.S.U.R.E is an acronym that stands for Mirror, Evaluate, Action, Systemize, Unify, Review, and Energize. On each episode, I'll be chatting to a business owner about how they stay motivated and how they've got the measure of their business. So without further ado, let's find out who's joining me on this episode. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Motivated Business Show with me, Mark Terrell. Today's guest is someone that I haven't met in person, but we've connected by a mutual friend and just had a really interesting conversation beforehand. So there's going to be some great content worth sticking around for. So if you're joining us live, then welcome along. And if you catch us on replay, also welcome along. And don't forget that you can always leave us any comments and we'll get back to you if there's anything that comes up during our conversation that you'd like answered. Just before we start our conversation and dig into the topics, just want to mention my book. The reason I mention it is that firstly, you can buy it from me. And so welcome anybody that would like to buy one. If you'd like to buy me a coffee, that helps to keep the podcast on the rails, as it were. And also, if you buy me 2 coffees, and I would be more than happy to send you a copy of my book. So, and the way to do that, you can scan the QR code, or you can click the link, which will be somewhere in the comments in wherever you're watching the podcast. So there we are. The book, by the way, you can either buy it direct from me or you can buy it from Amazon in book or Kindle form. Right, let's get on with the show and let's bring on our guest today. Welcome, Bev.
Good morning.
Welcome along. And before we get into the conversation, let's give you the opportunity to introduce yourself properly.
Thank you very much. Hi, Mark. It's lovely to be here. So I'm Bev Thorogood. I am a business owner, a late business owner, which I'm sure we'll talk about. I always call myself an accidental entrepreneur because it wasn't ever the plan to have a business of my own. But I work with coaches, wellbeing practitioners to help them to navigate the corporate market. So basically getting in front of the decision makers so they can take their wellness knowledge into the corporate world, because quite frankly, I think employers need to look after the welfare of their people better. And there are so many talented coaches out there who can help. So that's what I do.
Brilliant, excellent. It's interesting you talk about corporate, the market there. It's obviously something I'm not aware of, and I've never been in that sort of space. So it'd be interesting to see what opportunities there are, particularly for how you help coaches to get into that space. But let's start from where you started with regards. You mentioned it already. You started a business. It was quite late on in your age-wise. And tell us about what you did before that.
Yeah, so I spent 32 years working in the public sector, working for the Minister of Defence, 30 of which I worked for the Royal Air Force. So I wasn't in uniform, I was a civilian, but I worked for the Royal Air Force for a long time. Doing various roles. I think when you're in the public sector, you do tend to move around a little bit from department to department. But I feel like I've told this story so many times in the last 6 years. But basically, when I turned 50, my menopause kicked in. And it kicked in with a bit of a vengeance. And I spent 2 years just really, really struggling with menopausal symptoms, brain fog, anxiety, lack of confidence, as well as some of the physical symptoms. Thankfully, hot flushes weren't particularly high up on the agenda, but it did really mess with my confidence. I felt a lot of the time like I was losing competence. And after 2 years, I ended up resigning from my role. And I trained as a health coach, a nutrition coach, and also a personal trainer. And I thought, well, I need to do something that's on my terms, that I can fit around when my energy is high, when it's not. So I started coaching. And I was the people I was coaching were all going through that same menopause transition. And I basically sort of fell into working with corporate. And I don't, if I look back, I'm not entirely sure where the transition happened. I did get invited to talk about menopause to a group of ladies up at RAF Cranwell through an ex-colleague of mine. And that led to me getting some work with the Royal Air Force to actually talk to managers and to some of the women that work down at Air Command, which is the Royal Air Force's head office. And I had a training background, so I'd been in the learning and development world for about the last 10 years in my role for the Air Force. And that kind of led to me delivering this menopause training, and that's how my kind of business started. And from there, I just started to get work with both public and private sector businesses. And I was talking a lot about the impact of menopause on me and on other working women that I was sort of meeting. I was talking a lot about that on LinkedIn. And starting to get picked up. We're going back 6.5 years now, and I know lots of talk about menopause is out there now. It really wasn't the case 6 years ago, but certainly not in the business world. And basically, I built my business as a training company specifically around menopause awareness.
Right. Okay. And the other thing that you've mentioned a lot, and obviously it's an important part of what you do, and the realization that at 56 you were late diagnosed as ADHD, and that's had a quite a big influence on your decisions from that point. And so, do you want to expand on a little bit about, for those that don't know what ADHD is, what it is, and how it affects what you do and how you do it?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was going through the whole sort of menopause stuff at work, I wasn't aware of the fact that I had ADHD. I was always aware that I had challenges that other people seem to find very easy. I always struggled with things like organisation and impulsivity and lack of focus in some areas and hyper focus in others, which are very typical traits of somebody with ADHD. But I wasn't aware of it, Mark. I had no idea that I had ADHD. If I'm honest, I was very ignorant about what it was. I thought it was just bad parenting of naughty little boys. To my shame, that was, that was what I'd understood about ADHD. Mm-hmm. But I was coaching somebody who had ADHD, and she picked up on the fact that I displayed an awful lot of the traits of ADHD, and I was, I trusted what she had to say. Started doing some more research around it, and ticked off so many of the ADHD behavioural boxes, if you like. And when I was sort of researching about ADHD, what kept coming up was how ADHD seemed to manifest a lot in women when their hormones were all over the place, which got me thinking about, well, hang on, is this partly why I struggled so much with the perimenopausal symptoms? Was there a sort of a clash of the hormones going on? And the more I tried to research it, the less I could find definitively that kind of had been studied about the impact of those sort of two conditions meeting. But there was so much anecdotal evidence out there. And that led to me doing a TEDx talk called ADHD in Menopausal Women, looking at the fact that there's such an overlap of the symptoms. And certainly from getting my formal diagnosis, which was January 2023, so I was 56, it helped me to really understand some of the less positive behaviours, but also to recognise some of the more positive behaviours. Now, I'm always a bit reluctant when people say ADHD is a superpower, because I think for many people it's a real challenge. But there are definitely strengths that I've associated now due to my ADHD. Mm. And you're right, it has meant that it does come more into my decision making now, because I'm aware of the struggles that I have. I've certainly been more willing now to take help and bring people onto the team. I have somebody whose sole role in my business is to manage me, because my own sort of self-management from a business point of view is challenged. things like organisation and staying focused and not getting, distracted with shiny objects. So she does that. That's her role. So it has definitely helped in my business to be aware. And I love the fact that in your book, your first part of M.E.A.S.U.R.E is about mirror. That whole self-awareness piece and being aware of our behaviors and the impact that they have on other people, and also the impact that they have on our own decision making. So it has made a huge difference, actually, getting that diagnosis and just really understanding myself better. I kind of wish I'd had that level of understanding and awareness in my 20s. I think I'd have had potentially a different career trajectory, but it is what it is. I found out in my 50s. I don't think ADHD in women was even recognised up until about 20 years ago. I think
Right.
it just wasn't recognised at all as a female condition.
Yeah, I had to laugh when you said that you've got someone in your business that actually manages you, because I've got a friend who he says he's ADHD, and there's several people that have come, yes, he has. He shows lots of the traits, and every now and again a text out of the blue comes, do you fancy a coffee? And I know what it is. He just needs to just run something by me, and it's almost like, oh, this. What do you think? It's just almost like it's just like driving me a bit mad, and I just sort of like have to just listen to him and then just say, right, well, what I'm hearing is, and so. But as you said, it's understanding and actually being aware of these things. It's important. Once you're then aware, then you can then manage them better. It's when you don't know quite what's going on that's the problem, isn't it? I watched a little bit of your TED talk earlier, and one thing that came out of what I watched was that you said that you're 7 times less likely to be diagnosed if you're a girl. So that was interesting, because I've never really, obviously, all these facts that come out. So you're obviously, presumably, somebody that has luckily found it by accident, as opposed to being diagnosed in the early
Yeah,
stages, as you say.
absolutely. It was purely down to the fact that I was coaching somebody who was neurodivergent and is actually a neurodiversity specialist who picked it up in me. I think there's a massive shift in understanding over the. I guess it's like that. It's like anything. Once you become aware of something, you see it everywhere, don't you?
Yeah,
But I think bizarrely, things like TikTok and Instagram have really helped to allow people to be more open about some of the things that they're dealing with. And then, but because if you've never heard anybody talking about the challenges that you have, because we're very good at masking all of our sort of perceived failings, if you start to see people talking openly about their challenges and you suddenly start to resonate with what they're talking about, it becomes a more normalized conversation. And then it becomes much easier to, I guess, own up to some of the challenges. So I think, yeah, I don't know if that statistic is still true, that 1 in 7. It was certainly, from my research, I'm always a bit dubious about statistics anyway, but that was a statistic that I was able to dig up when I was doing my research for the TEDx talk.
let's hope it's not. Let's hope that
Well,
awareness
let's hope
has
things are
gone
changing.
forward, and so things have got better. Yeah,
Yeah,
let's.
I do think that even the criteria now still seems to focus an awful lot on the hyperactive impulsive side of ADHD. So for the listeners who aren't aware, and maybe you're not aware, Mark, there are 3 types or 3 subtypes of ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. You've got the inattentive type, the hyperactive impulsive type, and then a combination of the two.
Right.
I was diagnosed with inattentive ADHD, which is very, very common in women. We tend to see the hyperactive impulsive side more in men,
Yeah.
although I definitely have some of that hyperactivity, more mental hyperactivity than physical, but the impulsiveness is definitely there. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think that the focus often tends to be more on that hyperactive element than the
Yeah.
inattentive. So certainly a lot of children, female, girls, as they're going through school, aren't picked up because they don't show the typical signs of hyperactive behavior. They tend to be a bit like I was, a bit sort of dreamy and daydreamy, and quiet in actual fact. I wasn't misbehaved. I was just in a bit of a world of my own, zoned out a lot of the time.
It's that impulsiveness that my friend shows a lot of traits with regards to he's male, so seems to make sense. So let's move away from ADHD and more about your business, because you've actually recently transitioned from your business. You've actually closed a business, and you do other sort of work now. So do you want to tell us how you came about that, made that decision, and why you do the work you do now?
Absolutely, and I can't separate it from ADHD because it was an impulsive decision. So I spent sort of 5 and a bit years delivering menopause training to corporate businesses, and I think some of the ADHD traits. I'm sorry, Mark, I can't really leave that behind because it does drive a lot of the decision making.
Yeah.
Boredom is a big thing for us. We have very interest-driven brains, and after 5 years of talking about menopause, teaching about menopause, supporting people through that, I think I'd kind of got to the point where I was feeling a little bit bored with the business side of things. I was very much still of the opinion that we needed to be talking about this, but I'd kind of gone through that whole transition in my own life as well. And I felt it was time to kind of pass the baton over to people coming up who were dealing more with the day-to-day challenges and perhaps could feel more of the passion for that messaging that I'd felt earlier. I kind of felt that had diminished a little bit. And I was getting asked a lot of the time by people, how did you get in front of the decision makers in corporate businesses? How did you land clients like Channel 4 and Amnesty International and the UK Space Agency and Bauer Media and all of these different sort of big businesses and big organisations? And I was getting asked a lot, and I thought, actually, I don't know. I had to sit down and really look back and think about, well, what did I do? What were the steps I took to position myself as, a sort of an expert in that field? What did I do to get out there and become visible and, market myself in that way? So I ended up kind of making the decision to answer those questions for other coaches who were wanting to do what I'd done. So I basically relaunched the business as a coaching and mentoring business. I was a trained coach, and I've just again done another coaching certification. I love coaching, I love teaching, and it was a way to kind of carry on building on the knowledge that I'd got from building a business, because when I left the MOD, I had no idea how to run a business at all. I was completely clueless, and it was a steep learning curve. And I thought, well, actually, I'm not so far down the road that I can't relate to what people are going through in terms of starting up their business. So that's how I pivoted, really, and started working more with wellness practitioners, coaches, to help them understand how I'd built my business, but also to help them to, I guess, get into the right mindset, because a lot of the time it's not a lack of understanding of what to do, it's a lack of confidence around, have I got what it takes to do this? Am I good enough? Am I knowledgeable enough? Am I expert enough? The old imposter syndrome and self-doubt is big. So the coaching side comes into really helping people to find the confidence to take their message forward. But yeah, it was definitely an impulsive decision, because I literally overnight decided to close the business and messaged all of my clients the next day saying what I was doing. And obviously I would fulfill any, contracts that were already existing, but that I wouldn't be continuing. And it was some might say it was a bit of a stupid decision, because my business was doing well. It was, I'd had the best year ever. But I think I was heading towards a bit of burnout as well, which is quite common, I think, with ADHD as well. And I just needed to do something different to, I think, keep my passion alive. And I sometimes think passion is overused, because I don't know that I started with a massive passion for delivering menopause training, but I became passionate about what I was doing, and I'd start to lose that passion. So I needed to find another way to put my passion into something different. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely makes sense. And I was just thinking about what I would have done in your position without the ADHD, with regards to transitioning, I would probably have thought, well, there's value already in this business. I would probably find someone that does similar to me and say, would you like to sort of partner and then gradually take over these clients from me? And there'll be a sort of, but I suppose that's the ADHD, is it's like no, I've made a decision, I've got to move on quickly, and it doesn't allow you to make those sort of small decisions, I suppose you could say, which obviously can, who knows what's right and wrong, but that's the sort of the thought that I was thinking when you were saying that you closed the business and started a new one.
Yeah, absolutely. I read it. I was listening to a book called Burn the Boats. I can't remember who it's by, but basically the premise of the book was, you can't have a plan B. If you have a plan B, you'll always rely on it. You need to burn the boats and go with plan A. And it was that book I was listening to on Blinkist, so it was like a pre-seed version of it. And I just thought, that's what I've got to do. If I keep holding on to the menopause awareness training, I'll always fall back on that because it's safe. And then I'll never make anything of the new business. So it felt like I had to make that kind of line in the sand and move forward. But yeah, it was probably, from a business point of view, not the best business decision ever, if I'm honest. On the outside, it looks a bit foolish.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's for you to decide, but it sounds like you're doing all right. So not to beat yourself up about it. So let's talk about the opportunities in corporates then. So I've got a number of people that I know that are sort of trying to get their foot in the door with regards to, let's call them, large clients, which would obviously transform their business. So without giving away everything you do, what would you say that, let's talk about the mistakes people make, I suppose.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest mistakes people make is their messaging is aimed at the people that are going to benefit from their coaching. Right. So for example, when I was delivering menopause awareness stuff, really the end user were the women who were experiencing menopause who would get the support.
Yeah.
But that's not the message that I was giving through my marketing. The marketing was really focused on the benefit to the business or the organization. The fact that, so many women were leaving the workplace, they were losing talent, they had high absenteeism because, people weren't feeling supported, high levels of stress and poor performance. That was often, it was a consequence of what they were going through with menopause. But actually, in my marketing, I had to be talking to the business and their needs, as opposed to the solution, which was to raise awareness about something that was affecting their people. So I also did things like manager training to help them to be more aware. But again, I wasn't necessarily marketing to the managers. I have, when I think about my marketing and when I teach how to market, I talk about the decision makers, the influencers, and the interested parties. Mm-hmm. And I think you can market to all three, but the messaging is different. And I think it's the decision makers that business need that people often miss. So perhaps they're talking about mindfulness in the workplace. So they'll talk a lot about the benefits of mindfulness. They'll talk about how it can help the employee. But unless the business is aware of what that's fundamentally going to do without being too blunt about it, the bottom line, they're probably not going to pick up on the need. Mm. I also think a big element that people don't do enough of is boasting and bragging about what they know. And I think you have got to be willing to put yourself out there and get visible and talk a lot about your subject, because at the end of the day, people, whether it's corporate or not, people won't buy from you if they don't perceive you to be the expert. And I think self-doubt gets in the way a lot of the time of people getting onto the likes of LinkedIn or jumping on a podcast as a guest and actually talking about what they do from a place of authority. So unless you do that, no company is going to necessarily trust that you know your stuff. And I guess the third thing that I think people get wrong is they don't talk enough about their own story. They don't differentiate themselves enough, especially if they're, say, perhaps doing leadership training or something like that, which is quite generic. It often comes from a place of leadership theory, When in actual fact, I think what people buy into is the person, and the stories that go with that. So the lived
Yeah.
experience, the professional experience, the personal experiences, the values that somebody has. All of this comes into developing your own story, and if you can get that story across along with your authority, so maybe it is your credentials, maybe it is your social proof, maybe it is your, the qualifications and the research that you've done, but it has to come alongside your personal story, because I think for me, my experience has been people buy, corporates as well, buy into people. We tend to think of corporate as an entity, but behind every corporate, there's a person. Normally an HR manager or a well-being lead is a real person who will be still buying with emotion, even though they might justify it with business logic. They're still going to be buying on emotion. So if you're not getting your personality and your story across, you're kind of not setting yourself up for success, I think. So they would be my kind of three things. Make sure your messaging is getting to the right people, share your story, and be willing to get visible.
Yeah, brilliant. Great top tips there, Bev. And also, I was going back to the first one with regards to selling your service as opposed to solving the pain or the problem. If you just say, well, I do menopause training, then okay, so what? What does that actually, what does the training, what's the outcome? And if that means that you are going to get more engaged staff, less likely they're going to leave, then you turn on it's going to save me money in the long term, or it saves me time, or because ultimately that's what we buy. We want to, in most cases, we're buying something that saves us time or makes us money, and solves a problem. And just selling yourself as a trainer of a something like menopause isn't really talking about the pain or the problem, is it?
Nobody needs training, really. No. Nobody buys training. People buy the outcome of the training, and if you're selling training, you're missing the point.
Yeah. I've heard it mentioned that training without coaching is more entertainment than actually you're going to get more likely that you're going to turn up for the training, but actually whether you're going to implement it, that's where coaching and mentoring comes in. And I'm guessing that you do still do some training, and also the coaching and mentoring actually then follows on to make sure those things are being actioned.
I didn't do a huge amount of coaching and mentoring. A lot of what I did was more transactional, which was also part of the reason I think that I moved away into more of the coaching side of things, working with individuals, because unfortunately I think there is a tendency with corporate to put on a training and think that's job done, but they don't necessarily invest in the longer term behavioral change that needs to happen. Training is great. It gives you knowledge, it gives you understanding, it raises awareness, but it doesn't necessarily alter attitudes or behavior. And I think that's where sometimes that coaching and mentoring, maybe longer term programs, really come into their own. I think the subject that I was delivering was a bit transactional. And I do think there was an element of luck as well. I happened to start my business at a time when people were starting to open up more about menopause. So there was an element of luck there. But I do, a lot of it was down to just being very, very clear in my messaging. My LinkedIn profile, I think another tip, I guess, is make sure that your LinkedIn profile is absolutely crystal clear about what you do. Don't be vague. Don't be ambiguous and don't try to be everything on your LinkedIn profile just because you can't teach everything. Be more niche, I guess, than that, and really focus on what you're going to be as an expert. You want to be a heart surgeon, not a GP. If you want people to buy your services, I think you've got to be more specialised. Specialised.
Yes. Great. Bev, I'm going to give you an opportunity to sit back for a couple of minutes. I'm just going to introduce the 7-step process, talk about that. And the reason why I talk about it is that there's always a connection to all my guests with regards to the 7 steps and why they're there. And Bev has already mentioned, this section of M.E.A.S.U.R.E being important to understand ourselves, so we make conscious decisions with regards to what's important to us, and actually also being really aware of our behaviours and how that impacts others. So the M.E.A.S.U.R.E stage sorry, it looks a bit really untidy there, doesn't it? It's really important to understand ourselves, and that's why it's the first step in the process. And once we know that, then we can make better decisions with regards to the next step, and that's where we evaluate the business. So Bev has told us that she's sort of transitioned from one business to another, and I'm sure there's all sorts of things going on there. I'm going to just talk in a second about motivation and what drives those behaviours and behind and what makes us make those decisions, but evaluating what's right for us so that we've got a business that actually fulfills what we really want from our business. And if we've got to a point where the business is not really lighting us up anymore, then that tends to be the time when we make those decisions to sort of move on and do something other than what we're doing at the moment. So with regards to motivation, I use the motivational maps model, the 9 motivations here. We have all 9 motivations. So which ones are particularly with regards to what we've been talking about here? So I was talking to another person that left a corporate arena and started up their business. And the one thing we talked about was the importance that when they were within that organisation, this was the defender motivator was probably important to them in their early stages of their career. They wanted something that was stable, secure, and predictable. But as time went on, the drive and the motivations changed. And actually, what she was saying was that the spirit motivator was the thing that was driving her to do something more, which was more, she had more autonomy and freedom to do the things that she wanted to do. So she had to give up that security to be able to do the things that she really wanted to. And she had to understand that if she carried on holding on to that feeling of stability, which was okay, it was sort of a comfort blanket, it wasn't going to allow her to prosper and thrive in the way that she really wanted to. So it was something that she had to decide, and and that decision has been fruitful for her. And it sounds like, Bev, you probably had the same sort of thing going on with regards to, do I stay here or do we go forward? There's probably something that drove you forward with regards to the thing that you knew, actually then driving you into something that's actually maybe not quite so stable, secure and predictable because you hadn't actually done it at that stage. So I think that's what I'll leave it at that for now. Bev, have you got any comments on what I said?
No, I'm trying to remember what my motivational maps result was. It's a few years since I had my map done, and I can't remember, unfortunately, what I came out as. I do think, I'm hugely gut led. I think, sometimes you've got to listen to your gut rather than the logic, because the logic will keep you safe. And sometimes we've got to be willing to take a risk. And I'm not talking about being reckless, but sometimes I think, we get one shot at life. So to stay with something that doesn't feel fulfilling or doesn't feel fully aligned to what you really want from life, sometimes you've just got to take that leap of faith and trust that your gut is telling you the right thing. And I think a lot of people don't really listen to their intuition as much as they could.
No. Brilliant. Beth, just before we go, because you said something to me just before we came live, and you mentioned that the current decade that you're in, which I'm not going to mention which one it is probably one of your most fulfilling. And do you want to share a little bit about that? Because I thought that was quite inspirational, what you told me before we came live.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't mind saying which decade I'm in. I'm in my 50s. I'm 58. It was a decade I was dreading, if I'm honest. I think I thought, life hit a peak at 40 in my 40s and it would be all downhill from there, and it hasn't been. I started my business at the age of 52. It was a complete life change. My husband left the Air Force at pretty much the same time, and he now works for himself. Our whole life has changed. We've got much more freedom to come and go and do the things we want to do on our terms. So it's been an absolutely brilliant decade. It's not been without challenges. It's, what is it they say? Diamonds are formed under pressure, and I think going through the whole trauma is that too strong a word of the menopause transition and the ADHD diagnosis and everything was quite challenging. But it's also brought about so many opportunities. Whoever thought I would do a TEDx talk, whoever thought I'd write a book, whoever thought I'd run a business on my own. It's all of these things that I would never have had the confidence to do when I was younger. So actually, I think my 50s has been such a voyage of opportunity, and I can't wait for my 60s, because I think, things are getting better decade by decade.
Hmm.
So every year we know more, don't we? We're constantly evolving and learning, and I just think it's a great time of life, which is sometimes, you know undermined. I think I wish businesses would recognise that we're not a washout by the time we get to our
No,
50s. Actually, we've
no.
still got a huge amount to give,
Yeah.
and with an aging population, we're able to perform at a high level for longer, than we've ever been able to in the past, I think. So yeah, I just
Brilliant.
think it's a fabulous time. Don't
Well
dread
said,
it.
Bev.
Don't
I'm
dread it.
I'm I'm in the 50s club, so yeah, let's big shout out to the 50s. So yeah, absolutely, and I can definitely agree with what you just said. It's a decade that I think they do say that once you get to that sort of 50s, late 50s, you sort of see the world in a different way and you start making
Yeah.
decisions in a better way, which is there we are. It goes with the experience that we've learned over the time, I guess. Bev, sadly the time's run out, so I'm hugely grateful for your time today. Really, you shared some really important messages there, and so thank you for being a guest. And hopefully we can catch up again very soon.
That'd be great. Thanks so much for having me.
Great stuff. So there you are. So that's Bev. If you are, well, you talked about the ADHD, and you talked about also the menopause, and also if you're a coach or someone that's trying to get into the corporate arena, then Bev's the person to speak to. So thank you to Bev for all that she shared. I've learnt a lot, so hopefully you have as well if you're watching this or listening to it. Just before we go there, just to mention just another plug for my book, which you can get direct from me or from Amazon, where I share the 7-step process, which I spoke about a few minutes ago. If you'd like to help keep the podcast on the road, then any donations via the Buy Me a Coffee is gratefully appreciated, and you can do that by scanning that code, or you can click the link, which will be somewhere on the in the comments or in the show description, and where you can buy me a coffee. And if you buy 2 coffees, then I will send you a copy of my book. So thank you for those that joined us live, and if you catch this on replay, don't hesitate to leave a comment for myself or for Bev if there's anything that you'd like questions answered, or any comments that you have around what we talked about. Always gratefully received, and any interaction is it's great to see that you are getting some value from the conversations on the podcast. But for now, have a great day, and I will catch you very soon on the next episode of the show.